atom is a great new world resource of much-needed energy. The production of atomic energy begins deep within the core of the reactor, where tiny atoms break up. Fragments from one strike and break up others.
Ionizing radiation is invisible, yet its presence permeates every aspect of the modern world, from medicine and industry to energy, politics, and the military. For over a century, humanity has been living with it. We have tried to understand it, to control it, to transform it into military power, or use it for peaceful purposes. Living with Radiation, a research program funded by a European Research Council Consolidator grant and directed by Professor Maria Rentedzi at Friedrich Alexander University Erlangen, Nuremberg, has been a unique attempt to capture the different ways in which radiation has shaped scientific practices, social attitudes, political decisions, and diplomatic negotiations across the 20th century. One of the outcomes of this project has been a visual history of radiation protection, tracing not only the human stories woven through its evolution, but also the institutional landscapes that have shaped its course. The exhibition, Living with Radiation, hosted at the Siemens Healthineers MedMuseum in Erlangen, Germany, from June 12th to August 31st, 2025, told this unique story through photographs gathered from archives around the world. These striking images traced power asymmetries between the global north and the global south, illuminated national ambitions for modernization, and revealed the intricate forces, institutional, political, and social, that have shaped the history of radiation protection. At the beginning of the 20th century, radioactivity became a symbol of progress. Radium drinks, cosmetics, and medicinals promised life and vitality, even renewed sexual rigor to impotent or overworked men. Radium was celebrated as a miracle of science, a radiant new source of energy and well-being.
Radium and X-rays were discovered by the very end of the 19th century. It was also the time that the Curies, together with Becquerel, described the phenomenon of radioactivity. By the next, let's say, 30 years, there have been two different developments. In Europe, where the scientific tradition was really very strong, we have scientists that try to understand the physical, the chemical, and the medical properties of radium and X-rays, both of them. In the US, the tradition is totally different, and the focus is on the industrial applications of radium. It's the time that has been characterized as radium craze. It's the time that, for example, men were using radium suppositories for sexual performance, better sexual performance, and the women were advised to use radium cosmetics and radium creams in order to become more attractive. This is the period, though, that in both continents, radiation protection is not at the center of what was happening. It's the period, for example, Pierre Curie was walking around with radium salts in his pocket, and also in the early 1920s, the radium industry ignored the very first signs of radium poisoning.
Photographs worked more than visual records of the 20th century nuclear world. They opened a window into the shared responsibility that linked institutions, scientists, and the state. From the early radiologists who used their bare hands to calibrate X-ray machines, to those who later developed systems of protection and control. These images reveal how the pursuit of knowledge has always tied to questions of risk and accountability. The development of radiation protection is also a story shaped by military competition and thirst for political power. From the engineers who built the first atomic bombs and suffered the consequences of exposure, to the refined safety protocols of today, progress has been written with personal cost.
The very first guidelines for radiation protection came out in the early 1910s, and if I'm not wrong, it was the Germans that issued the very first ones, and the British followed them. But it was not enough. The scientists at that moment, they didn't have a big picture, full picture of the effects of both radium and X-rays. It was the time that radiologists used their bare hands to calibrate the X-ray equipment, or scientists moved radioactive materials without protection. We learned more about radiation protection during the Second World War. When the Americans were producing the atomic bomb, they were trying to find out more about the effects of especially plutonium on the human body. And this is when they performed experiments, radiation experiments on humans. They injected plutonium in people that had no idea that this was happening to them. It was not only the Americans that did this. In the 50s and 60s, the scientists in USSR followed with the same and similar research programs.
It would be unrealistic to imagine that we will ever find every document that bears on the story of human radiation experimentation in which the Manhattan Project, the Energy Atomic Commission, and DOE have been involved, considering that 3.2 million cubic feet of records still survive in dozens of locations from coast to coast. Ellen R. Weiss, Director, U.S. Department of Energy, February 1995. Living with radiation guides us on a journey of self-awareness, showing how humanity learned to see the invisible. From Chernobyl to Fukushima, from the tensions of the Cold War to the recent disruptions of the world order, every nuclear disaster or international crisis reminds us that nuclear safety remains a constant negotiation between science, society, and politics. The international nuclear regulatory system, technical, scientific, and legal, that took shape in the late 1950s was a result of the geopolitical divisions of the Cold War. It also grew out of intense negotiations among the newly created international organizations that elevated nuclear science to a highly diplomatic issue. Indeed, since the end of the Second World War, radiation protection has been shaped not only within scientific laboratories and medical clinics, but also in the halls of international organizations. The International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, established in 1957, sought to strike a balance between the peaceful uses of nuclear energy and the demands of global security, between civilian prosperity and military power.
The International Atomic Energy Agency is the result of very intense negotiations, political and diplomatic negotiations throughout the 50s. When the statute of the organization was signed in 1957, one of the diplomats that took part in these negotiations claimed that that was the major diplomatic deal that they were able to sign during the 20th century. The organization took the lead. It sidelined international scientific organizations that cared about radiation protection, and it is the institution that actually did two things at the same time. It regulated the nuclear energy, and at the same time, it promoted the peaceful uses of atomic energy.
The agency will foster international cooperation at the technical level and will, we believe, make a scientific contribution to the work of the United Nations in solving its political problems and preserving peace. Sterling Cole, first Director General of the IAEA in 1959.
Even today, we understand that the International Atomic Energy Agency is at the center of the negotiations that are happening right now concerning the nuclear world order. It's the result of the geopolitical context of its time, and we saw this in the recent war in Ukraine and the central role that this organization played in this conflict.
Images have a life of their own, often moving beyond the limits of traditional historical sources. In Living with Radiation, we think with photographs. As they are juxtaposed, they bring to light forgotten or neglected histories. Stories that could hardly be written in any other way. They prompt crucial questions. Who produces and controls knowledge about radiation risk? Who has the authority to define what is safe? And who is the one who regulates? Today, 80 years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, societies continue to live with radiation. It fuels our industries, promises cheap and sustainable energy, continues to shape military power around the world, cures cancer. Yet it could also leave lasting, devastating effects on the human body and the environment. And the question remains, who decides how we live with it?
Currently, we are back in a new Cold War. At this moment, the US and Russia return to nuclear testing. France and UK modernize the nuclear arsenal, and China is investing heavily on nuclear energy, nuclear industry, and at the same time on nuclear weapons. So I really wonder, have we really learned anything from the history of nuclear disasters? I doubt it.